Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Informed Chiropractor. This is Dr. Don MacDonald, your host. Today, I'm going to do a little bit of a solo session. We are just ramping up to come into the fall, and I've had a few questions about the MacDonald Safety Corridor. So I thought I'd just have like a segment just dedicated to the MacDonald Safety Corridor, just so people kind of understand it. You'll actually still be able to take a lot of information and be able to implement it into your practice from this episode. The cool thing about the MacDonald Safety Corridor Protocol is it's not a technique on its own. What it is designed to do is it's designed to amplify anything that you're currently doing in your office. One of my frustrations was always when I was first going to a technique seminar is that it was so different from what I was currently doing in practice that you'd have to almost change everything in practice. And then we all know how that goes. You come back from a seminar on a weekend and you try to change everything in your practice, and it lasts for about maybe a week. And if you don't make everybody really mad because everybody has suddenly something different happening, you end up going right back to the way it was before. And we all know, as far as the polyvagal theory goes, predictability is our superpower. So whenever we are learning anything new, we want to just slowly implement it. Often implementing new things just with the new practice members that come in your office is often a really good idea, instead of just kind of like changing everything in one fell swoop. Some people say it's like ripping a Band-Aid off, but as far as safety in our physiology and our staff, chiropractic assistants physiology, it might be a good idea just to kind of gradually implement stuff. So again, the MacDonald Safety Corridor is a protocol, and I want to thank. We've had close to 150 chiropractors going through one of the levels. Each level, we've been to like 4 different countries now teaching this, and I want to thank the chiropractors that have done it, because the more I teach it, the better I get to understand it. It's funny, you might notice this in practice too, that when you're adjusting, say you have a student come in or somebody asks you how you're doing what you're doing. Often it kind of like blows your mind, because you have to almost like step outside your body and go, why am I doing what I'm doing? And so being more conscious with what you're doing in your practice is super helpful. And just over the last 2 years of teaching this, it's actually really helped me with my technique. And so I'm probably the best and the most confident in my chiropractic adjusting now than I ever was before. And I think taking it to a new level, not only teaching chiropractors, which is a different story than teaching students. So I've learned this firsthand. When I go to a seminar and we have chiropractors that are in your, in practice anywhere from 10 to 25 to 30, 40 years, teaching a nuance to a technique is like super easy compared to teaching it to a student that has no foundation knowledge at all. And so I've had the pleasure of being able to start teaching students, obviously teaching chiropractors, and that's just helped me kind of get my brain wrapped around this whole idea of adjusting through a polyvagal lens and all the different facets of it. So I've actually broken it down into 6 corridors. There are 6 safety corridors. I've always focused on one of them, but this kind of this will hopefully make sense to people, that you can start to be a little bit more conscious in your practice. So when I'm talking about a corridor, we were talking about, I thought about at Palmer, we have the Mississippi River, and there's the locks in the river, so that the boats can go up and down throughout that river. So the initial corridor was this vagus corridor that comes down through the jugular and down through the ventral aspect after it gets through the base of your occiput and through the cervical spine. But the main thing of a corridor is it's a communication pathway. And in the polyvagal theory, we have 2 cues. We have cues of danger and cues of safety. And so if we can be really cognizant of all 6 corridors and just being very mindful that the communication or the cues that are traveling this corridor are in safety. So the first corridor is the hierarchy of the nervous system. And we've gone over this before, but we have the 3 levels of the nervous system. The ventral vagal is the top level, where we are detecting safety. We are socially engaged. The 5 cranial nerves of our social engagement system are online. Our autonomics are in a regulated state, and we are healing. We are connecting. Our prefrontal cortex is like booming, full blast. We are in the optimal state. Then when we add cues of danger through this corridor, we first go to sympathetic, fight or flight. And then if someone comes in fight or flight, we all notice that it's all the sympathetic dominant, right? Where people are all like jacked up and tense and ready to fight. And then the third one, which this is the big surprising one for us, why I thought the polyvagal theory was so important, and especially post-COVID, is we got into the dorsal vagal, which it was a shutdown freeze response. And so understanding that corridor and being able to help our practice members put inputs into the nervous system that can help bring us back up to that ventral vagal state. So that's the first corridor that I always like to think of as far as when I'm adjusting someone. The second corridor is the neuroceptive corridor. And the neuroceptive corridor is our defense mechanisms, and this is below a conscious level, and our nervous system is just constantly scanning the environment for threat at any time. It could be a real threat, or it could be a perceived threat. And the interesting thing about neuroception is it takes our history and things that have happened in our past as information that's processing at the exact same time. That's often why you'll see something or smell something or hear something or experience something, and all of a sudden it triggers you back to a previous point in your life, which will change your autonomic state instantly. And so that is something to be really aware of, because our goal is to get more live time real neuroception. So as a chiropractor, as we're adjusting someone, we want to get that state of ease and get a safety cue, not only remove cues of danger, which is the subluxation, but also get safety cues into that nervous system. And we want to be aware of that. That's why we always talk about it. You could have two chiropractors giving the same adjustment to the same segment, and there's going to be a totally different response depending on the neuroceptive threat of the person. So again, to the patients, you could even have two patients coming in, or practice members, by the same chiropractor, but their neuroceptive threat is wired differently than the others. So just being able to be aware of that safety corridor, that's the corridor between the practice member and their environment. Now, the third one is the interoceptive corridor. Now, this is the one in the practice member between their brain and their body. Now, typically what happens is if we have a danger or a threat or a trauma, one of the safety mechanisms of the body is to dissociate, or the brain is to dissociate from the body. And if we dissociate from the body in the short term, it is actually a protective response so that we don't have to experience the full brunt of what's going on at that time. However, often most people have to stay dissociated from their body. You'll probably notice in practice where people come in and you're palpating through their spine and they don't really feel very much. They can't tell the difference between certain feelings. If you say, is that dull or is that achy or is it pins and needly, they can't really tell the difference. Sometimes 2-point discrimination is really bad. And so being aware of that and being able to pre-frame this as people come back into their body is super important to understand, because our goal is to, first of all, I always say the goal is to make your body a little bit more inhabitable first. We want to optimize function, get things moving better, and then we want to get the brain to be reconnected back into the body. And so that's why the interoceptive corridor is super important, because when that is active and it's live time and it's sending in the cues of safety, it really helps with the nervous system to getting more into a regulated state. Now, the fourth safety corridor is the co-regulation corridor. Now, this corridor is the corridor between you and your practice members, or you and your staff, or you and your chiropractic assistants, or you and your wife or your kids. This is that co-regulation communication. Again, it's below cognitive awareness, but we need to have somewhat of an introception of ourself to make sure that when we're coming to practice, we're in a state of regulation. We have to make sure that the environment in our practice is in such a way that it's a safe environment. We want to make sure our policies and procedures, our agreements with practice members, all of our policies and procedures are all lined up nice and snug so that we are not in a stressful state. And then also too, this is also communication with other chiropractors in your office. This is the relationships with maybe massage therapists, with your chiropractic assistants. It's super important for these to be cleaned up, because we need to be in a regulated state to be the best co-regulator we can throughout the adjustment. Now, co-regulation, we think about this in the big picture, like in general, how your day is going, but our nervous system is always kind of going like regulated, dysregulated, but the goal is to be in the regulated state for as long as possible. So even within a shift while you're adjusting your practice members, there are moments where we can get a little bit dysregulated, or we start to rush, or we start talking and they ask us a question about something. Sometimes my practice members will ask me a question about something I'm really interested in, and it gets me a little bit off track, and I start talking and I stop getting zoned into that present moment. These are the things that we're always trying to get back dialed in, because we really want to be aware of their physiology, making sure our physiology is good, making sure their physiology is good. As soon as we're in that safe position, safe movement, all of our adjustments go a lot smoother. So being aware of that co-regulatory corridor is super important as well. Now, the fifth corridor is our force application. And I've mentioned this before, is that often in chiropractic, it's funny, when people change up their force application, it also almost changes up their analysis at the same time. So we have activator, which is the force application, but it's also the analysis. It's funny, we have an intern in our office, and so when they put down activator, that means the analysis. That doesn't mean the force application. And so we always just want to differentiate. Your analysis is different than your force application. But then we have Thompson, right? So activator would be instrument impulse or force application, but activator protocol. Then you have Thompson, which is the Thompson protocol, but then drop force application. And then say you have Gonstead, which would be Gonstead analysis, but more of a manual force application. And so we just want to differentiate those and realize that we can still keep our own analysis, but maybe there's certain times where we might want to change our force application. Now, this corridor, safety corridor, is that awareness of what that tissue can take as far as an input, because there's always the phenomenon of too much or too little. And so there needs to be input or information that is added into the nervous system. It needs to be enough where it's picked up by the nervous system, but it can't be too much where it overwhelms the nervous system. And you'll know when people are under care for a longer period of time, that window or that safety corridor changes. As people get in better shape and they're healthier, more regulated, they can handle a lot more input. And I always say they go from like being fine china, where they're really rigid and they feel very delicate, to being a lot more flexible, better tone, and they feel like they're just a lot more hardy and mobile and adaptable to their environment. And so when we're talking about the safety protocol, we're always talking about this force application and how much input we can put into the nervous system. And then, of course, the sixth safety corridor is the one that we really focus on not only while, but after we've adjusted them as well. We always talk about before I always had them face down, I'd adjust them face down, and then they'd be gone. Now, what I just like to do is I like to just flip them over on their back and just double check the whole corridor of that vagus nerve as it goes basically out from the occiput, around the atlas, down cervicals, through your whole rib cage, around the heart, through the diaphragm, down through the viscera, all the way down into the hip flexors and the lower pelvis. And the reason being is that knowing now that the vagus is 80% sensory, it's a surveillance system. So it's just surveilling your environment at all times. But in your core visceral cavity, it is surveilling for threat physiology. Often, like if you've ever had like bad news or you heard something that you didn't want to, or you had to have a difficult conversation, usually you feel that tension going into your viscera or your stomach. And then often, if we don't get it out of there, it stays there. And so many people, like I tell them, we'll just do a light little traction down on the stomach, and you'll feel just like it's kind of a ball there, and we don't have that nice little give. That esophagus doesn't just kind of have that nice state of ease. We can tell that the body's dysregulated. And often practice members will say, "What is that?" And I'm like, well, you cannot be regulated and have your stomach feel like a rock, and vice versa. You can't be dysregulated and your stomach be totally in a state of ease. Like that's the face gut connection, or the social engagement gut connection. And so it is. And then most people are like, oh yeah, okay, good. And then you can tell too, because as you work on it over time, the safety cues throughout the viscera just calm down, and it's just more of a global response to put cues of safety into that nervous system. So those are the things that we address at all the seminars that we do. And really we've broken down into 3 different seminars. So we call it level 1, but we don't have to do these in order. So the first seminar is upper spine. So we're basically talking about all the different ways to do either analysis or force application in the upper spine, but also addressing all 6 of these safety corridors throughout that section of the spine. The second part that we do is we call it level 2, but we're calling it the lower spine. And so again, the lower spine is analysis and force application in the lower spine and the lower safety corridor of the vagus. And then for our extremities seminar, we basically will address all the extremities. We will address fascia and just being able to link having cues of danger in your extremities and how that links into the fascia, links into your neuroception, which can also, dysregulate that nervous system. And so it's just kind of the three different parts that we're going to focus on. Again, most people, we've had multiple different techniques coming to this, and again, they've been able to implement little things. And the great thing is that we usually attract chiropractors that have been practicing anywhere between like 5, 7, all the way up to like 30 years and 40 years in practice. And so really, I always find when I go to seminar, if I can just pick one or two things up, it's just helpful for me in practice. And so I just wanted to take a little bit of time to go over what the safety corridor protocol is, because we've just had lots of people reach out. And again, I have had a hard time describing it at first, because I just know the results that we see in the practice. That's why, again, we do a lot of we do posture, all of our objective findings. So we're doing posture, balance, proprioception, flexibility, facial pictures, posture pictures, x-rays, scans, heart rate variability. All those things just help to tie into measure how someone's doing on the regulation scale. And again, when we're using this language, we're still honoring all the chiropractic principles, because the chiropractic principles are like timeless. However, just some of the language in the polyvagal theory is just a little bit easier for them to understand, because we're using safety instead of ease, because a lot of people kind of don't understand that ease. At the beginning, we always talk about the entry points. So what are the principles that we can mention to our practice members early on in practice that links to things that they already know? That's why we like to use analogies, because it's a lot easier to link what we're trying to get across to our practice members in an idea or a concept that they are already familiar with, rather than teaching a brand new philosophy or concept. That doesn't mean that we're not going to talk to them all about it. We have visit after visit after visit during our regular table talk, where people are not only in a more receptive state to learn. We have to remember, in the first 2 visits, usually they're freaked out. They don't know what it is. Maybe they've never been to chiropractor before. Maybe they're in a whole bunch of pain. There's a whole bunch of things that is turning off their prefrontal cortex and their social engagement system, so they have the least amount of ability to hear what you're saying. And ironically, I used to do this too. All my education was all front loaded at the time when they were the least receptive to hear what was going on. And so understanding this could be another corridor, is the education corridor of the safety corridor. And that opens up after they've already been under care for a while. And so having some kind of table talk or ways to be able to get these concepts through, so that practice members continually learning about how to connect to their body, how to stay regulated, how chiropractic is helping them do the things that are important in their life, is super important throughout the whole rest of their practice. So like I said, if you guys have any questions at all, you reach out. We do not have too many of these seminars really going on. We just have we have an extremities one coming up in October in Montreal, and we have our lower spine safety corridor coming up in Windsor in November. And then, of course, we have our we have our super conference, which is coming up in December. And this is just going to be like for your staff or the whole office, just to kind of get an idea of how to work these. Because again, all the top 4 corridors can all be worked on by your chiropractic assistants as well. And that's what's helping to create the environment of healing, so that those practice members, when they walk in, they're just more likely to just feel like, I just feel, they've already say this, because a lot of times you're doing this already. We just aren't maybe conscious of the neurology or the science behind it. But people will come into your practice and they say, you know what, I just came into the practice and I already feel better just walking in the door. And the great thing about that is, if you can create that environment in your office, it just makes your adjustment so much easier. I've had it both ways, where, maybe you're too behind, or maybe they just got stuck in traffic and they got kind of rushed in, and then they're just lying on the table and they're just vibrating. It's a lot harder to get that right force application in, to get that nervous system regulated, rather than if they walk in and they've got met at the front really warmly. They might be, while they're maybe waiting for their adjustment a bit, they're chatting with other people, because we have a sense of community in our reception area. And then they come back and they lie face down and they just take a couple breaths and they relax. And then you come and see them, and there is a total different state. And it makes it a lot easier for us to do our job, as far as performing the adjustment and making sure that when they leave, they are regulated in that moment. And to reconfirm the care plan, that's why you need multiple visits, because we can create immediate regulation or immediate ease. But they need to be under care long enough to create more sustained ease, because at the very beginning, most of our people coming in are wired for threat. We always love Joe Dispenza, and he always says that neurons that fire together, wire together. And if someone's always in a stressful environment, they are wired for threat. And we have to slowly start to create that new pathway in their nervous system, which helps to wire them for safety or wire them for connection. I hope this helped. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.